Hello, students. You are welcome to session 4 of Unit 6. And in this session, we'll be looking at effective assessment. My name is Patrick AJ. Now, at the end of this session, you should be able to understand how to plan an effective assessment as a teacher and also identify and implement some of the characteristics of effective assessment. Now let's look at planning for assessment as a teacher. And so every assessment that is done in the classroom as a teacher, we must plan before we implement or execute it. And so to determine whether student learning outcomes have been achieved, then student assessment must be an integrated part of teaching and learning. Assessment must form part. It shouldn't be something which is done outside the teaching learning process. It must be part of the teaching learning process. An assessment of student learning involves careful planning and systematic implementation. So as a teacher, before you execute any task for the purpose of assessment, then you must carefully plan that task and also ensure a systematic implementation of that task or activity. So assessment purposes, approaches, and tools should be developed with instructional approaches during the planning of the unit. So the various approaches you are going to use, the various tools you'll be using in assessing your learners, all these should be planned whilst you are preparing for the topic you are going to teach or the unit you are going to deliver to your learners. And so in developing assessment tasks and methods, we as teachers, we determine what we are assessing. What are we going to assess from our learners? Why are we assessing these skills or these tasks? How the assessment information will be used? How are we going to use the information that will be obtained from our assessment? Who will receive the assessment information? And what assessment activities or tasks will allow students to demonstrate their learning in authentic ways? What activities can we give to learners to ensure that worthwhile activities or a worthwhile demonstration of the learning outcomes are being achieved? Now, what are the characteristics of effective assessment? And so for an effective assessment, it is congruent with or it is an integral part of instruction. And so as teachers, assessment requires that we should be aware of the purpose of instruction. What student learning outcomes are we targeting in this assessment? What can students do to show that they have learned? And so as teachers, all these things must come to mind anytime we are planning assessment tasks. And so if the physics that we are learning or we are teaching in the classroom place a high value on collaboration, it places a high value on creativity, divergent thinking, then we must ensure that our assessment tools and processes reflect these values. And so the ways in which we do our assessment, what we assess, how we do our assessment informs students of what is considered important during the teaching learning process. And also, effective assessment is an ongoing and a continuous process. And we cannot take assessment out of the teaching learning process. And so during the teaching learning process, the assessment that happens normally which by way of providing feedback to our learners help them to modify their way of learning. It helps them to also observe their own progress. So in the classroom during the teaching learning process, we can assess our learners informally by asking the questions, and students will provide answers to these questions. And note that the comments that we provide whenever students provide answers to questions that we ask also help to modify their learning, and it also helps them to observe their own progress on the learning. And also, effective assessment is based on authentic tasks and meaningful science learning processes and contexts. And so every assessment task must be worth mastering for the learner's own sake, rather than activities that are designed just to demonstrate students' proficiency for teachers and others, so that you ask the student, what is this? And they are able to rattle it out for the teacher. No. The activities should be those activities that students will see that, yes, it is indeed good for me to learn and understand this concept. So through assessment as teachers, we are able to discover whether the activities or the learning that happen in the classroom, teachers can use knowledge from it. Learners can use knowledge from it. They can use knowledge from the learning processes, the resources that are provided to them. Our assessment must be targeting these key issues rather than learners just chewing and pouring some definitions for us in the teaching learning process. Again, assessment that is effective is based on the criteria that students know, they understand, and the tasks are appealing to their strengths. So assessment tasks must clearly establish and make explicit to students before an assignment or a test. So before we will give the learners the activities, we must let them know what exactly they are going to do, what is expected of them. And when students are involved and they know what is expected of them, then they are able to take the various activities that are being assessed, they take them seriously. And they know that at the end of the day, whatever thing that I learn out of this instruction, I should be able to use the various knowledge and understandings that I have gained here. And when this is done, you realize that our learners are motivated to learn and they take active part in the teaching learning process. So again, an effective assessment is a collaborative process that involves students. And once we involve our students in the assessment process, then the ultimate purpose is to help our learners to also assess themselves. And note that the gradual increase in students' responsibility for assessment, the main reason for doing this is to develop students' autonomy as lifelong learners. Once they know that, well, whatever things that I am learning in the class, I can assess myself. I can find out how well I am progressing on these activities. Then you realize that when these things happen, they are no longer going to over rely on the teacher's responses to validate how well they have achieved a learning task or not. And when this is done, they are able to make judgments about their own learning, and this also provides them with information for them to set goals and to also monitor themselves during the teaching learning process. Again, an effective assessment is a multidimensional task and it uses a wide range of tools and methods. So every assessment that is effective made use of different approaches, different tools to gather data about student learning. And finally, an effective assessment focuses on what students have learned and what they can do. So an assessment must offer opportunities for success for every student. An assessment must help learners to demonstrate the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes. As well, all these are things that an effective assessment must seek to. Effective assessment should not be looking for the deficiencies in students' learning. It should rather focus on what the learners have learned and what they can do after going through a set of instructions. Now, what are the strategies that a teacher you can use to assess what your learners have learned? And so, as a teacher, use a wide range of instruments to assess the multidimensional expressions of students' learning and avoid reliance upon rote memorization. Don't always depend on students being able to just freely express themselves when you ask a question. Maybe it may be a factual question and students are likely to chew the definitions and they can just give them to you. So as a teacher, you must rely on a wide range of instruments anytime you want to go for an assessment or you are planning for an assessment. And also provide students with opportunities to learn from feedback and to refine their work, recognizing that not every assignment will be useful. So once you're able to do this and learners know that, okay, so in my summative evaluation, my final report that will be given about me is not going to be based on all the assignments that the teacher has given me. Then you realize that anytime they are learning, they will take their time to learn and also understand the various tasks that are given them. And also examine several pieces of student work in assessing any particular learning outcome. So whenever you are assessing student learning outcome, don't just depend on, let's say, a written exercise you gave them. Sometimes you could have given them a drawing assignment. You could have given them a project work to do. You must examine all these activities in order to provide a good information about your learner. And also develop complete student profiles. So in developing student complete profiles, you can use information from their reference assessment. And basically the reference assessment talks about you, the teacher, comparing the student's performance to a predetermined criteria. Or you can even use their self-reference assessment. And here you compare their performance to their prior performance. So you can compare the learner's performance in the first semester to the second semester, and that can help you to know whether the learner is progressing or retrogressing. And also avoid using assessment for purposes of discipline or classroom control. So you enter the class and you realize that your learners are making noise, and all of a sudden take your exercise books and let us do this exercise. You realize that your learners are only going to participate and they are going to write down something for you because they were not involved, they are not aware whether something of this nature is going to happen. And it is found that assessment that is perceived as a tool for controlling student behavior, netting out rewards and punishments, rather than providing feedback on student learning, will reduce student motivation. And so, as much as possible, teachers, we should not use assessment as a means of controlling students' behavior or to discipline our learners. Students, in this session, we looked at how to plan an effective assessment as well as the characteristics of an effective assessment. As we bring the session to an end, explain briefly 5 characteristics